The barn dance came around every autumn, a tradition older than the fences that split the fields and older still than the polished boots that scuffed the wooden floorboards. This year, Ethan found himself strangely restless as the date drew near. He had attended plenty of times before, often with Daniel at his side, but there was something about this particular evening that carried a weight he couldn't name. Daniel, his partner of 4 steady years, sat at the kitchen table polishing his glasses, his movements calm and deliberate. Ethan had always admired Daniel's patience, the way he seemed content in the rhythm of everyday life, cooking dinner together, watching television in the evenings, and quiet weekends spent on the porch. Yet that very steadiness now felt like a blanket tucked too tightly around Ethan's chest. Safe, yes, but stifling. The invitation had come earlier that week, not by post or printed flyer but in person, from Caleb. Ethan had been leaning against the counter at the feed store where he worked when Caleb sauntered in, hat tipped back, that ever-present half-smile on his lips. Caleb was one of those men people noticed even if they tried not to, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of confidence that filled the room before he said a word. "You comin' to the dance Friday?" Caleb had asked, leaning an elbow against the counter. Ethan had opened his mouth to decline. He and Daniel went every year, and he didn't need an invitation, but the way Caleb's eyes lingered, amused and challenging, shifted his answer. "Yeah, we'll be there," Ethan said. Caleb's grin widened, slow and knowing. "Good. I'd hate for you to miss it." It was a simple exchange, but Ethan carried the weight of it all week, hearing those words again whenever he caught himself staring too long out the window or turning restlessly in bed. Daniel noticed his distraction but assumed it was about work. Ethan didn't correct him. On the night of the dance, they dressed in familiar clothes, Daniel in his pressed shirt, neat and understated, Ethan in denim softened by years of wear. As they walked up to the barn, lanterns strung across the beams glowed amber against the night, laughter spilling out to greet them. Inside, the air was thick with music and hay dust, the floorboards vibrating under the stomp of boots. Daniel held Ethan's hand lightly as they entered, his grip warm but loose, as though it didn't occur to him anyone else might ever reach for it. Ethan squeezed back, grateful for the comfort but painfully aware of how ordinary it felt. Across the room, Caleb stood among a circle of friends, hat tilted, boots tapping to the rhythm. His eyes found Ethan's almost immediately, and the grin appeared again, small but electric. Ethan's pulse quickened, though he forced himself to look away. They danced together at first, Ethan and Daniel, moving in practiced steps. Daniel smiled at him, steady and unbothered, the picture of loyalty. Yet Ethan found his gaze wandering, drawn again and again to the figure leaning against the far wall. Caleb didn't hide the way he watched, and every time their eyes met, Ethan felt the floor shift beneath him. The night rolled on, music swelling and fading, neighbors greeting them with handshakes and laughter. Daniel told stories, content in the familiarity of it all, while Ethan nodded and laughed at the right moments. But the sense of something unresolved pressed against his chest, a quiet ache he couldn't shake. At one point, Ethan slipped away toward the refreshment table, needing a moment alone. The crowd swirled around him, voices and fiddles blurring together. He took a breath, steadying himself, when a shoulder brushed against his. Caleb had moved closer, his voice low, warm with mischief. "You look restless tonight." Ethan startled slightly, caught between guilt and intrigue. "Just tired," he murmured, though his pulse told another story. Caleb leaned in, close enough that Ethan could smell the faint trace of tobacco and leather. "Come outside for a minute. Get some air." Ethan froze, cup in hand, the noise of the barn receding into the background. Every part of him screamed to refuse, to stay planted beside Daniel, to honor the trust they had built brick by brick. And yet, his legs felt unsteady, ready to move. The invitation lingered between them like a live wire. Ethan didn't answer, not yet, but the decision throbbed inside him, alive and dangerous. The air outside the barn was crisp, carrying the scent of cut hay and earth cooling beneath the autumn stars. Ethan stepped through the open doors with measured hesitation, as if each footfall could still be retraced, though he knew the moment he crossed that threshold he had already chosen. Behind him, the barn pulsed with life, music, laughter, the shuffle of boots, but out here the night was quiet, private. charged with something unspoken. Caleb leaned against the split rail fence a few yards away, hat tilted back, hands tucked into his pockets as though the entire scene were unfolding exactly as he intended. He didn't call out, didn't wave. He simply waited, confident Ethan would come. And Ethan did. "You made it," Caleb said, voice low and smooth. The kind of voice that didn't have to compete with fiddles or chatter, it simply carried. Ethan stopped short, arms crossed over his chest as if to guard against what he felt brewing inside. "I shouldn't be out here." "No," Caleb agreed, stepping forward just enough for the lantern light from the barn to brush across his face. "But you are." The words held no judgment, only recognition, and that was what disarmed Ethan most. Daniel would never have spoken like that. Daniel spoke in certainties, in boundaries drawn and upheld. Caleb spoke in possibilities, in doors cracked open just wide enough to make the air shift. "You've got Daniel in there," Caleb continued, his tone more curious than accusing. "Man like that, he trusts you." Ethan flinched at the truth of it. "He does." Caleb studied him quietly for a beat, then let a half-smile tug at his mouth. "So why are you out here with me instead of in there with him?" Ethan swallowed hard. The easy answer, just for air, sat on his tongue, but it felt hollow, insincere even to himself. His silence spoke louder, and Caleb seemed to understand. For a moment, neither said anything. The night hummed with crickets, the distant rhythm of boots inside carrying like a heartbeat. Caleb shifted, closing the space between them by a fraction, and Ethan felt the nearness as keenly as if he'd been touched. "You ever get the feeling you're living someone else's life?" Caleb asked softly. "Like you did everything right, made all the right choices, and still, part of you's asleep?" The words sliced clean through Ethan's defenses. He looked away, eyes fixed on the shadowed field beyond the fence. "I've thought about it," he admitted, barely above a whisper. "That's 'cause you know it's true," Caleb said. There was no arrogance in his tone, only certainty. "I see it in your eyes. You want more than safe, Ethan. You want fire." Ethan's breath caught. The truth of it was both frightening and undeniable. Daniel offered comfort, reliability, a love rooted in stability. Yet here, under the stars with Caleb, Ethan felt an urgency that rattled him to the bone. He took a step back, as though distance might steady him. "This is wrong." Caleb didn't move closer. He simply watched, his stillness more compelling than any advance. "Maybe," he allowed. "But wrong doesn't always stop us, does it?" The admission made Ethan's chest tighten. He hated how much he wanted Caleb to close the gap, to make the decision for him. And yet, what scared him more was how alive he felt in the wanting. "You don't know me," Ethan said finally, though even as he spoke, he knew Caleb had already seen enough. Caleb tipped his head, eyes glinting beneath the brim of his hat. "I know what it looks like when a man's starving for something he doesn't have. And I know you feel it too." Ethan's throat went dry. He had no rebuttal, no neat denial to pull from his pocket. The silence between them swelled, heavy and fragile, like a wire strung too tight. Then Caleb reached out, not bold, not forceful, but with the faintest brush of his fingers grazing Ethan's hand. The contact was fleeting, gone as soon as it landed, yet it burned hot enough to sear through Ethan's restraint that he should have pulled back, should have walked inside, should have gone straight to Daniel and buried this moment under loyalty. Instead, Ethan stood frozen, skin tingling where Caleb's touch lingered in memory. "Don't think about tomorrow," Caleb murmured, his voice coaxing, intimate. "Just let yourself feel tonight." Ethan's breath hitched, his body betraying him with its lean toward the warmth of Caleb's nearness. The world inside the barn felt miles away, Daniel's presence suddenly a distant echo compared to the pulse thundering in Ethan's chest. The fence creaked softly as Caleb leaned against it again, giving Ethan space to choose, but the choice felt like no choice at all. Ethan's heart was already stepping forward even as his mind screamed to turn back. Somewhere inside, the fiddler struck a faster tune, the barn crowd cheering in rhythm. Out here, beneath the cool sweep of stars, another rhythm was taking hold, quieter, sharper, more dangerous. Ethan let his arms fall to his sides, his chest rising with an unsteady breath. The line between loyalty and temptation blurred until he could no longer tell which side he stood on, and in Caleb's quiet, knowing smile, Ethan saw his undoing. The space between them vanished with startling inevitability. One heartbeat Ethan was holding himself taut, fighting the pull, the next, Caleb's lips brushed against his, brief and searing, like a spark thrown into dry grass. Ethan didn't step back. Instead, he leaned in, surrendering to the ignition that spread through his veins. The kiss was unhurried yet consuming, layered with all the restraint of men who knew they shouldn't but couldn't resist. Caleb's hand cupped the side of Ethan's jaw, calloused thumb grazing his cheek as if to claim it. For an instant, Ethan's world narrowed to the warmth of that touch, the taste of whiskey on Caleb's tongue, the impossible certainty that he had been waiting for this. When the kiss broke, Ethan's chest heaved as though he had run a mile. Shame struck almost immediately, sharp and heavy, but it came twinned with an intoxicating rush. He had crossed a line that could not be undone, and beneath the guilt lurked a flicker of exhilaration. "This isn't who I am," Ethan whispered, though even to himself the words sounded weak. Caleb's gaze held steady, neither triumphant nor apologetic. "Maybe it's exactly who you are," he replied softly. "You just never gave yourself permission to admit it." Ethan staggered back a step, hands trembling at his sides. Daniel's face flashed in his mind, his quiet smile, his steady eyes, the trust woven through every gesture. The thought of it nearly buckled Ethan's knees. How could he face Daniel now, knowing what he had just allowed? Caleb didn't press further. He leaned once more against the fence, calm as ever, as though certain the moment would linger with Ethan far longer than words could. "Go on," he said. "He'll be looking for you." The barn door glowed ahead, spilling golden light into the night. Each step Ethan took back toward it felt weighted, like dragging chains. His lips still tingled, his skin alive with the echo of Caleb's touch. By the time he slipped inside, the music had shifted to another reel, the crowd cheering, oblivious to the fracture burning inside him. Daniel spotted him instantly, relief brightening his expression. He waved Ethan over, as though nothing in the world could have gone wrong in the minutes they had been apart. Ethan forced a smile and crossed the floor, every nerve raw. "Where'd you go?" Daniel asked lightly, handing Ethan a drink as though extending trust in the simplest gesture. "Just needed some air," Ethan managed. His voice cracked at the edges, but Daniel didn't notice. He wrapped an arm around Ethan's shoulders, drawing him close in the familiar way he always had. To anyone watching, they looked like the same couple who had walked in together at the start of the night, but inside Ethan's chest, the ground had shifted. The warmth of Daniel's arm no longer felt only like comfort, it felt like accusation. He stood there, stiff and silent, torn between the security he had built and the fire he had just touched. The evening stretched on, dances unfolding in their familiar order. Ethan moved with Daniel, smiled when prompted, laughed when the crowd demanded. Yet his mind drifted again and again to the shadows outside, to Caleb's unwavering eyes, to the undeniable electricity that had left him shaken. At one point, across the barn, Caleb reappeared. He didn't approach, didn't speak. He simply leaned against a post, watching. Their eyes met briefly, and in that flicker of connection Ethan felt his stomach twist. Caleb gave no sign, no smirk or gesture, only a look that told Ethan what he already knew. The night had changed everything. Ethan tore his gaze away, focusing on Daniel, who was happily recounting a story to a neighbor. The contrast cut Ethan to the bone, Daniel's trust so effortless, Caleb's temptation so dangerous. He wanted to cling to the man beside him, to bury himself in the safe rhythm of their love. But deep down, he feared he had already stepped too far to return unchanged. Later, as the music slowed and couples swayed beneath the lanterns, Ethan rested his head against Daniel's shoulder. Outwardly, it was a picture of devotion. Inwardly, guilt and desire battled until he no longer knew which was stronger. The barn felt both sheltering and suffocating, as though its beams carried witness to his betrayal. The dance would end, the lanterns dim, the night fold back into silence. Tomorrow, Ethan knew, choices would still wait for him, truths to confront, consequences to bear. But tonight, beneath the soft hum of strings and Daniel's steady heartbeat against his cheek, he lived suspended in the fragile aftermath of surrender. And across the room, Caleb's eyes lingered like a flame Ethan couldn't look away from, a reminder that nothing in his life would ever feel entirely safe again. Morning light spilled across the kitchen table, soft and golden, yet Ethan felt as though the sun itself carried judgment. He sat with a mug of coffee cradled in his hands, staring at the rising steam, while Daniel hummed absently over the stove. The scent of frying bacon should have been comforting, familiar, yet every note of domesticity grated against Ethan's nerves. The memory of Caleb's kiss lingered like smoke in his lungs, unshakable, invasive. Daniel turned, plates in hand, smiling as if nothing in the world had shifted. "You were quiet last night," he said lightly, setting breakfast before them. "The dance must have worn you out." Ethan forced a chuckle, his throat dry. "Yeah. Just tired." It was a small lie, but it carried the weight of betrayal. Daniel accepted it without question, his faith so unwavering it nearly broke Ethan. He wanted to confess, to tear the guilt from his chest and lay it bare. But fear silenced him, fear of Daniel's heartbreak, of his own shame, of admitting aloud that desire had carried him somewhere he couldn't return from. All morning, Ethan moved through routine like a ghost. Daniel chatted about work, neighbors, the errands they needed to run, while Ethan's mind wandered back to Caleb's steady eyes and the dangerous calm with which he had let Ethan walk away. Caleb hadn't demanded anything. That restraint made him more haunting still. Later that day, while stacking hay in the shed, Ethan heard footsteps approach. He didn't have to look up to know who it was. Caleb's presence was a tide you felt before it broke the shore. "Thought you might be out here," Caleb said, leaning against the doorframe with casual ease. Ethan's heart lurched. "You shouldn't be here." Caleb shrugged. "Place looked quiet. Just wanted to check in." His tone carried no apology, only a steady confidence that unsettled Ethan more than any boldness could have. Ethan wiped sweat from his brow, refusing to meet Caleb's gaze. "Last night was a mistake." "Maybe," Caleb allowed. "But did it feel like one?" The question landed hard, sharper than a blade. Ethan had no answer, because the truth trembled inside him. It hadn't felt like a mistake at all, it had felt like freedom, like a part of himself he had long buried had finally been unearthed. And that truth terrified him. "I love Daniel," Ethan whispered, as though saying it aloud might shield him. Caleb stepped closer, boots crunching on straw. "I don't doubt that. But loving him doesn't mean you stop being human. Doesn't mean you stop wanting more." Ethan's chest tightened, torn between anger and longing. He hated how easily Caleb voiced the thoughts he couldn't. He hated, too, how much he needed to hear them. Before Ethan could respond, Daniel's voice carried from the yard, calling his name. Panic shot through him. He stepped back from Caleb, heart pounding. "You should go," Ethan hissed. Caleb gave a slow nod, lips curving into that knowing half-smile. "I'll see you around." With that, he slipped away, leaving Ethan rattled and raw. When Daniel appeared moments later, Ethan forced composure. Daniel carried a gentle grin, oblivious, asking about supper plans as if the world were perfectly whole. Ethan answered with practiced ease, his smile brittle but convincing enough, yet beneath the surface, the fracture widened. Every ordinary kindness from Daniel became a reminder of the lie Ethan carried. Every laugh, every touch, every word of trust pressed heavier against his conscience. And Caleb's absence felt like presence, the echo of temptation whispering at the edge of every thought. That night, as Daniel slept beside him, Ethan lay awake staring at the ceiling, the silence unbearable. He replayed the barn dance, the kiss, the look in Caleb's eyes. He replayed Daniel's laughter at breakfast, the softness of his hand resting unconsciously against Ethan's arm. He lived in two worlds now, one of comfort and loyalty, the other of hunger and danger, and though he had chosen Daniel in the daylight, Ethan knew the choice was far from over. Desire didn't vanish simply because you denied it. It waited, patient as a wolf at the tree line. Ethan closed his eyes, heart aching, knowing the story of last night was only the beginning.